In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at what OAuth is, and then we will be building a web app that retrieves your data which is stored on the GitHub server. OAuth is a authorization protocol and not a authentication protocol, which means you cannot use OAuth for sign-ins. But there is something known as OpenID Connect protocol, which sits on top of OAuth that allows you to authenticate the users. There are four main grant types in OAuth, and grant types are the method by which you are retrieving the information that is stored on the third-party applications. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at the authorization code grant type. In authorization code grant type, the user or the resource owner visits your website, also known as client, and then the client redirects the resource owner to the OAuth service provider authentication server. Once the resource owner authenticates, then the authentication server redirects the resource owner back to the client with the authorization code. Now that code is very short-lived, and for GitHub, it's around 10 minutes. Once client receives the code, then client again makes a request to the authentication server with the code in its search parameters, and then the authentication server authenticates the client and sends a access token to the client. Now, once the client receives this access token, it can use this access token to make request to the resource server where the user or the resource owner data is stored, and then it can retrieve information from there. Before we can use any OAuth service provider, we need to register our client. So in our case, we need to register our client on GitHub. To do this, we need to visit our profile and then head over to the settings option. There you will find developer settings, and then select the OAuth apps. Once there, you need to click on the new OAuth app. It will ask you for application name. You can type in anything you want. Then we need to enter our home page URL, which will be the URL of our website that will be using the OAuth service. And here is our authorization callback URL that we need to provide. Authorization callback URL is the URL where the resource owner will be redirected back to the client. Once everything is set up, we need to register our application. After this, you will receive a client ID and a client secret. Once our client has been registered on the OAuth service provider, now we need to redirect our resource owner to the following URL and include client ID in the URL search parameters, and we can also include some other optional parameters such as scope. You can read more about these optional parameters in the GitHub official OAuth documentation. When client has been redirected to the GitHub authentication server URL with the client ID in its search parameters, the GitHub authentication server asks the resource owner whether he is okay with sharing his data with the client or not. In both the cases, whether he is okay or even if he is not okay, he will be redirected to the callback URL we provided at the time of registration. If he is okay, then there will be a parameter name as code in the search parameters, and if he is not okay, then there will be a error in the search parameters. Once we receive the authorization code in the front end, we need to pass that authorization code to the back end, and in the back end we need to make a request to the following URL with client ID and client secret in our parameters, including the authorization code. Once the authentication server again authenticates the client, it sends an access token to the client, and using this access token, now we can make a request to the GitHub API and retrieve the data stored in the resource server. Here is what the data looks like that we just received from the GitHub API. Here we have the profile, user URL and the followers. And that's it for this video. Feel free to leave a comment.